Have you ever felt that even the most loving relationship can come with an invisible weight, a quiet exhaustion? That feeling of always having to be ready, having to explain, having to compromise. At first, it feels like connection, but over time, it silently chips away at your inner peace. Whether you're 35 and tired of relationships that lead nowhere, or 65 and starting to wonder if you really need anyone by your side anymore, you're not alone. More and more people are asking a brave question. What if living alone isn't loneliness, but a doorway to peace? Buddhism teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. When we stop clinging, we begin to truly see silence not as emptiness, but as a kind of fullness we've never touched before. And in that silence, a profound journey begins. The journey back to yourself. Stillness is where every spiritual path begins. Have you ever sat in a quiet room with soft lighting and the sound of your own breath? Yet your mind felt as loud as a marketplace that never closes. Outside, everything is silent. But inside, the voices won't stop. Voices of regret, of blame, of stories long past. Sometimes it's hope. Other times, fear. We often think of stillness as a place, a space with no noise, no distractions. But the truth is stillness doesn't come from the outside. It arises from within. And it's in that inner space where you finally stop chasing that the spiritual path begins to open. You don't need to move to a monastery. You don't need to escape to the mountains. You just need to sit down and listen. Because when you're quiet enough to hear yourself, you start to see something that's been with you all along your mind. A mind with many layers, sometimes light as a morning breeze, other times wild, like waves crashing in the ocean. And in that first honest look, you realize inside you, there is not only love, but also craving, anger, delusion. But there is also compassion. There is wisdom. There is awareness waiting to be awakened. You see, stillness is not about pulling away from life. It's about entering it more deeply. Just as the Buddha taught in Satipatthana to observe the body, feelings, mind, and mental objects with mindfulness and presence. And that observation only begins when you're willing to stop. Have you ever had a cup of tea without doing anything else? No phone, no thinking, just drinking and being fully there in each sip. If you've done that, you've already practiced meditation. Stillness doesn't come like a magic light from the sky. It returns like an old friend, one who shows up the moment you stop being busy. And when you remain in that quiet space long enough, you begin to see something life often hides. You've been chasing so many things, thoughts, expectations, emotions, compliments, attention. But rarely do you sit with yourself just to be. You might think, I don't have time for stillness. But ask yourself, what am I using my time to chase? And have any of those chases given me something that lasts? The Buddha once said in the Dhammapada, "The foolish run after desires. They never see the path to freedom. The awakened ones, they pause, not to give up, but to see clearly." No one walks far on the spiritual path without first learning how to stop. And when you stop, the first thing you meet is not peace, it's truth. you begin to see what you've avoided. You start to feel the emotions you've buried beneath work, social gatherings, distractions. But don't be afraid. This is the most important part of the journey. When you have the courage to face the truth, inside the small anger and the deep compassion, the quiet ignorance and the wisdom starting to bloom, you're no longer living in unconsciousness. Stillness is the soil where awareness is planted. You can't see the sky clearly if the water is disturbed, and you can't see your mind clearly unless you pause to observe it. The beauty is, you don't need to know all the teachings. You don't need to be a master of meditation. You just need to be honest. Honest when you breathe. Honest when you're sad. Honest when you sit down and feel lost, unsure, empty, and still choose to stay without judgment, without escape. That's meditation. Stillness doesn't take life away. It gives life depth. A meal without rushing. An afternoon watching sunlight through the window. A morning where your only goal is to simply be. That's practice. Because every spiritual path, whether it's Buddhism, Zen Vipassana, or any other way, begins in the same place, being fully present in the now. And that moment only comes when you're quiet enough to welcome it. Stillness is where you stop performing. You stop proving. You stop needing to be understood. You're just here, breathing your own breath and beginning to realize you were enough all along. 2. Inner peace. When you stop waiting for something outside, there's a kind of peace that doesn't come from a hug. It doesn't come from praise, and it doesn't come from being chosen, loved, or validated by someone else. It comes the moment you stop waiting for any of that. Have you ever tried living just one day without waiting for a message, without hoping for someone's approval, without wondering, am I good enough in their eyes? If you've ever tried, you'll know this. True freedom begins when your heart no longer depends on the outside world to feel whole. We grow up in a society that teaches you'll finally feel complete when someone loves you, when you succeed, when you become something. But Buddhism teaches the opposite. Peace doesn't come from the outside. It's your natural state when you stop searching. The Buddha called it Nibbana. Not some faraway place in the heavens, but a freedom that begins here now. A quiet extinguishing of craving. A deep realization that says, there's nothing to chase anymore. I'm home. So let me ask you, are you waiting for something right now? An apology, a happy ending to an old story, someone to return, or someone new to come fill the emptiness. There's nothing wrong with waiting, but if your whole life revolves around what you're waiting for, you may be delaying your own peace. In Buddhism, suffering arises from tanha craving, the craving to be loved, to be seen, to be understood, to be made whole. But the truth is, the more you crave, the more you hunger. The more you demand, the more you feel empty. And the more you cling to someone else to complete you, the further you drift from the wholeness already within. You've never really been missing anything. You've just wandered too far from yourself and forgotten. Imagine standing in a beautiful garden, but you keep staring out at the fence, waiting for someone to walk in and bring you flowers, while the flowers have been blooming all around you the whole time. You just haven't turned around. Peace is not something you achieve. It's something you return to, and you can only return when you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to feel whole. Many of us live like we're only a half searching for the other half. But the truth is, you are a full circle. You don't need anyone to make you complete. Love, when it comes, is meant to be shared, not to fill an emptiness. And when you stop waiting to be chosen, when you no longer need someone to love you in order to feel lovable, something surprising happens. You actually begin to be loved in a healthier, lighter, more peaceful way. Because now, you're not needing, you're just being. And that presence without demand is the most beautiful thing you can offer another person. In the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha teaches the end of suffering comes from letting go of craving. Letting go not because you don't care, but because you see clearly the more you chase, the more you lose yourself. You can love without expecting anything in return. You can give without needing gratitude. You can live without waiting for someone to make you happy. And there, in that space where you no longer rely on the outside world to define you, you begin to taste true inner peace. It's not flashy. It's not dramatic. It doesn't come with emotional fireworks, but it's steady, like the roots of a tree, soft like the morning breeze, and real, so real that you won't want to trade it for anything that merely sparkles on the outside. I once heard an old Zen master say to a student, "The day you stop waiting for someone to love you is the day you begin to love yourself." The student didn't understand at first, but years later, after heartbreak and healing, they returned and said, "I get it now. I spent so much time chasing love from others and forgot that real love isn't something you go out and find. It's the same for you. You don't need to be good enough. You don't need to be picked. You don't need someone beside you to make life meaningful. The deepest meaning is this: you are alive, truly alive, without needing to depend on anyone else. And when love comes, it's a gift, not a requirement. The Buddha never told us to close our hearts. He simply pointed out, when our hearts are empty from craving, everything that enters only deepens our dependence. But when our hearts are full with understanding, letting go, and mindfulness, anything that comes along only adds to the peace already there. That's what peace is. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need to be shown off. It doesn't need a reason. You just need to stop and look within. And if you're hearing this right now, perhaps a part of you is ready. Ready to stop waiting. Ready to stop searching. Ready to come home, back to yourself, where completeness never left, and where peace finally begins to bloom. 3. Freedom from the need to be recognized. There's a kind of burden that no one sees, but you carry it every single day. It's not your job. It's not your responsibilities. It's that subtle, exhausting feeling that you always have to prove something. You feel like you need to prove you're living the right way, that you're good enough, that you're lovable, that you're doing fine. You do things just to show others that you matter. And somewhere along the way, life starts to feel like a performance on a stage. The only problem, no one's clapping. No one sees how tired you are behind the curtain. This is one of the most invisible forms of karma being attached to how others see you. And the saddest part is you might have carried it for years without even knowing. Ever since you were a child, you learned to wait for approval. Wait for praise when you got a good grade. Wait for encouragement just to believe you were doing okay. Then, as an adult, you kept waiting. Waiting for a reply. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting for someone to say, "You matter." Have you ever paused and asked yourself, if no one sees this, if no one praises me, if no one even knows, would I still do it? If the answer is no, then maybe you're not really living for yourself. You're living to be recognized. And that, my friend, is a very clever trap. A soft one, a quiet one, but it slowly takes you away from your true self. You start walking carefully, not because you want to, but because you're afraid of being misunderstood. You choose a stable path, not because it's your dream, but because others expect it. You stay silent when you should speak, and you speak when your heart has nothing left to say. You begin to shrink little by little just to fit the expectations of others, and in that shrinking, you slowly lose yourself. In Buddhism, this mind that's always chasing validation from the outside is called Fan Du-yen, a mind that's restless, always reaching outward, seeking confirmation from the world. Only when you stop, truly live alone, can you begin to see this clearly. And by living alone, I don't mean just being in a house by yourself. I mean cutting the invisible strings that tie you to praise and blame, love and hate, acceptance and rejection. You begin wearing what you like, not what people say looks good. You choose a gentle, quiet life, even if they call you boring. You start doing small things, not because someone's watching, but because you finally want to live fully in each moment. And one day, you realize you don't need anyone's approval anymore. You don't need someone to say, "You're enough." You don't need the world to declare your worth, because you know, not in words, but in the stillness inside you, I am me. And that is enough. Freedom from the need for recognition doesn't mean you become cold or uncaring. It means you no longer let others define who you are. Because if you live by their gaze, you'll always be running. Today, they like you. Tomorrow, they forget you. And you'll be like a leaf in the wind, no roots, no peace. But if you live by your own quiet knowing, you become like a tree. You may sway, but you won't fall. There's a teaching from the Buddha that many forget. The wise one continues not because of praise and does not stop because of blame. In other words, a person of wisdom doesn't need applause to move forward and doesn't quit just because they're criticized. So think about it. How many times on your path have you postponed what you truly wanted just because you feared what others might think? Have you ever craved stillness but invited the noise because you didn't want to seem strange? Wanted a simpler life but got caught in the race because you feared being seen as lazy? Wanted to live differently but chose to act normal just to fit in? If you have, then maybe it's time to come home. To come home to yourself, to the place where you don't need approval, don't need applause, don't need a spotlight. Just you sitting quietly at the center of your life, no longer performing. Because the deepest freedom is the freedom from being watched. And in the gentle light of the Dharma, you begin to see clearly. There's nothing to prove, no one to please, no role to play, only the truth to live. Because when you no longer need recognition, that's when you truly begin to live. Not to be seen, but to be, to live because you know deep down you deserve a life that's honest and whole. 4. True happiness isn't having someone there. It's no longer abandoning yourself. There's a truth, as soft as a whisper, and yet it has awakened many. True happiness doesn't come from having someone always by your side. It comes from no longer leaving yourself behind. Maybe you've been in a relationship where day by day you felt yourself shrinking. You brushed your feelings aside quietly. You ignored your intuition gently. You said, "I'm fine," when deep down you weren't. You didn't leave, but you also stopped being you. And the most painful part, it wasn't when they turned away. It was when you gave up on yourself, just to hold on to something that no longer felt real. When was the last time you truly listened to your inner voice? The last time you said no, even if it disappointed someone. The last time you walked away, not out of anger, but because you finally knew you deserved peace. In so many relationships, what we lose isn't the other person, it's ourselves. And it happens so slowly, you don't even notice. It starts with one quiet compromise, one unspoken thought, one forced smile when your heart is breaking. Then one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back. The Buddha said, "No one saves you but yourself. No one can, and no one may. You must walk the path." And sometimes that path only begins when you live alone, long enough, deep enough to ask the question, where have I been? All this time, in my own life, when no one else is around, you start to see the cracks in your heart, the moments you silenced your emotions, the times you stayed quiet just to keep the peace, the times you fought to keep someone from walking away, but never asked, am I still standing with myself? And that's when the healing begins. Living alone isn't loneliness. It's how you learn to become your own best friend again. You start listening to the things you once buried. You begin to see the difference between what your soul truly wants and what you did just to feel loved. And perhaps most importantly, you stop betraying yourself to please others. Maybe you once thought love means sacrifice, but sacrifice isn't beautiful if it pulls you away from who you are. Buddhism teaches about compassion, a deep, honest love that never contradicts wisdom. You don't need to hurt yourself to hold on to someone. You don't need to be the rescuer, and you don't need to keep someone in your life if keeping them means losing yourself. Love doesn't have to be that hard. True love, if it's real, should help both people come back home to themselves, not abandon themselves chasing after a shadow. And if a relationship makes you forget who you are, forget what brings you peace, forget the boundaries you need to stay whole, that's not love, that's dependence. There's a passage in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha says, "The wise protect themselves like a fortress guards its gate." The fortress is your mind, your soul. That sacred place within that must never be left undefended. You don't need someone else to prove your worth. You just need you to stop walking away from yourself. And when you finally sit alone, with no one to impress, no roles to perform, you'll begin to see clearly. Sometimes the pain didn't come from what someone else did to you. It came because you didn't stand up for yourself. And that is the most precious lesson solitude can offer. Not from books, not from advice, not even from the people who pass through your life. It comes from that deep silence between you and you, where one day you finally place your hand over your heart and say, "I won't abandon you again." That's the moment you return to yourself, and that's when true happiness begins to bloom. Not because someone else is by your side, but because you finally are. 5. True freedom comes from simplicity and awake living. There's a kind of freedom that doesn't shout. It doesn't need to declare, "I'm being myself." It doesn't fight rebel or break away from the world. Instead, it quietly unfolds when you begin to live simply, when you begin to live awake, when you begin to move at the rhythm of your own breath. You no longer wake up because someone else's alarm says so. You no longer get dressed to match someone else's expectations. You no longer say what's acceptable just to be liked, to be included, or to keep a role you no longer feel connected to. You just live. And you live as yourself, gently, peacefully, clearly. Deep freedom doesn't come from doing more, owning more, or controlling more. It comes from letting go of what's not real. It comes from keeping only what helps you show up truthfully in your own life. Have you ever felt exhausted from always needing to be on smiling even when you're tired, answering texts even when your mind is foggy, showing up even when your soul is absent, stretching yourself just to fit into who others think you should be? This world, though full of progress, often pulls you into a rhythm far from your natural self. You eat not because you're hungry, but because it's time. You work not because you feel joy, but because you're afraid of falling behind. You talk not to connect, but to avoid being seen as distant. Bit by bit, you lose touch with yourself, and that's when freedom slips away quietly, like a blink. But here's the good news. You can call it back through simplicity. By pausing and asking, "Do I really need this? A simple meal? A room with less stuff? A life that isn't packed with back-to-back schedules?" This isn't about stepping away from life. It's about stepping closer to yourself. In Buddhism, freedom is deeply tied to letting go. Not letting go of life, but letting go of clinging. Not being pulled by the need to perform. Not being dragged by the thirst to compete. Not being tied to how others see you. The Buddha once said, "No one else can make you free. Only those who see the truth and live by the Dharma can step out of their own chains." And these chains aren't physical. They're the habits of needing to prove something, the roles we keep playing long after they've lost meaning, the fear of being left out, misunderstood, or not enough. Have you ever reached the end of a long day and realized you hadn't lived a single moment for yourself? Simple living doesn't mean cutting everything out. It means choosing what truly matters, what helps you be present, what brings you back to yourself instead of pulling you further away. Maybe you don't need every invitation. Maybe you don't need to chase every plan. Maybe you don't need to explain your choices to anyone. You just need enough clarity to say, "Right now, I need quiet," and enough gentleness to say, "I'll sit this one out." Because when you no longer live by someone else's clock, you start to feel every breath more fully. When you no longer dress to impress, you wear what feels like you. When you no longer speak to please you, begin to speak your truth or choose silence if needed. And strangely enough, that's when you begin to glow Simplicity holds a rare power. It brings you home to now. No running, no chasing, no clinging to anyone or anything. Just you, living in truth, not shaken by the noise of the world. Buddhism calls this living in accordance with the Dharma, living in truth, not against your heart, not against your path. And the greatest truth is this: you don't need to become more to be worthy. You are already enough the moment you stop trying to become something else. Freedom isn't saying I can do whatever I want. It's daring to choose less so you can live more, less noise so there's more depth, less burden so there's more mindfulness, less acting so there's more truth. Try living one simple day. No need to be perfect. No need to care what others think. Just you being present in each small act. Drinking water, breathing, walking, eating, sitting in stillness. And if in one quiet moment you feel your heart soften, if the voice in your head slows down, then maybe, just maybe, you've already touched real freedom. 6. Being alone isn't a problem. It's the beginning of peace. Have you ever sat in a quiet room completely alone, but still felt anything but peaceful? No one is interrupting you. No noise outside. But inside your mind, it's like walking through a busy marketplace that never closes. Thought after thought, emotion after emotion, all fighting for your attention. We've been told that loneliness is one of the greatest fears of being human. But if you listen closely, if you go deeper, you might discover what we fear most isn't the absence of others. It's the absence of ourselves. When was the last time you truly sat with yourself? No agenda, no goal, no distractions. Not to solve something, not to become someone, but simply to be. It's not that you haven't had the chance. It's that from a very young age, you were taught to run from solitude. Society paints it as something sad, something to be avoided. If you're alone, it must mean you're not interesting enough, not successful enough, not lovable enough. So, you seek company, not always because you crave connection, but because you fear confrontation with yourself. You fear the silence will reveal what you've been trying to ignore. You fear that when no one else is around, you'll finally have to face what hasn't healed yet. But here's the truth. Being alone is not the problem. Running from yourself is. Peace doesn't come when someone enters your life. Peace comes when you have the courage to sit still with no one to impress, nowhere to go, and finally stop feeling like a stranger to your own heart. In Buddhism, there's a practice called mindfulness of the body, the Nhun Niyam. It sounds simple. Just be aware of your body as you sit, breathe, or walk. But how many of us truly do that? Most of the time, even when we're surrounded by people, our minds are far away. And when we're alone, we reach for the phone, the TV, a new task, a new plan. We say we're busy, but busy with what? Often it's just another way to avoid sitting still with ourselves. But ironically, within that stillness, we run from lies, the peace we're searching for. When there's no one to please you, start living more honestly. When there's no role to play, you begin to listen more deeply. And when you're finally quiet enough, you start to notice something waiting inside you. something that's always been there. The Buddha once said, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." That path. It's not out there. It's not in another person. It's not in your next achievement. It's right here in your own presence. In the part of you that you've been too busy, too afraid, or too distracted to return to. Being alone isn't emptiness. It's space to breathe. It's not about isolation. It's a pause, a sacred pause after running too fast for too long. Being alone doesn't mean no one needs you. It means you finally recognize how deeply you need you. So imagine this. Tomorrow morning, instead of jumping straight into the noise, you begin your day with a small, gentle ritual. You brew a cup of tea. You sit in soft light. You don't check your phone. You don't plan your next move. You just show up with yourself. No explanations, no justifications, no performances, just presence. And in that presence, you stop running. And when you stop running, things begin to make sense. Maybe you'll cry. Maybe you'll feel empty. Maybe you'll whisper to yourself, "I don't even know who I am anymore." But don't leave. Stay. Because that's the beginning of something priceless, your return. Return to the parts of you you abandoned. Return to the inner child still waiting to be heard. Return to the truth. You don't need anyone else to make you whole. You only need to stop abandoning yourself. The Buddha taught, "The wise person lives in solitude, yet is never lonely." This solitude doesn't mean leaving the world behind. It means not being ruled by it. You can still love. You can still connect. You can still live fully in this world. But first, you must learn to live fully with yourself. Because if you can't sit with yourself, then every relationship becomes an escape. You'll attach. You'll expect. You'll search in others for what only you can give to yourself. And sooner or later, you'll be disappointed. Not because they left you, but because you were never fully with you. Peace doesn't come from the outside. It comes when you finally become quiet enough to see. You've been running long enough. And maybe, just maybe, today is the day you learn to stop. 7. The most beautiful relationship is between two people who know how to be alone. People often say, "The most beautiful love is when you find the right person." But perhaps the truer version is this: the most beautiful love is when you find your true self before you find anyone else. Have you ever really thought about that? There are so many people in love who still feel empty, still feel like something's missing, still feel insecure, anxious, or easily hurt. Not because the love isn't real, but because they haven't yet learned how to stand beside someone without losing themselves. A healthy relationship isn't about holding on so tightly that no one can breathe. It's about creating space for both to breathe, to grow, to be free, and still choosing to return to one another. Not out of lack, but out of wholeness. Not because you need each other to survive, but because you want to live life consciously together. Love isn't about finding someone to fill your emptiness, because the truth is that emptiness can't be filled by anyone else. Only you can do that. Only when you sit with yourself, listen deeply, and understand who you really are, can you begin to feel full again. If you don't know how to be alone, you'll enter relationships with a fear of being abandoned. You'll try to control, to please, to cling. You'll fear losing them because deep down, you've never truly had yourself. But when you learn how to be alone, not lonely, not running, just peacefully alone, then you can enter love without needing it to fix you. You can share space instead of filling it. You can love from abundance, not desperation. That's when a relationship becomes something beautiful. Two people walking side by side, no pushing, no pulling, no dependency. In Buddhism, this is the spirit of compassion and wisdom in love. Compassion means you want the other person to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. Wisdom means you see clearly no one owns anyone, no one controls another's heart, and no one is responsible for making you feel complete. A relationship can only truly flourish when both people are standing on their own 2 feet, not leaning on each other to survive, not loving out of fear of loneliness, not clinging to one another like 2 lost boats. Imagine 2 people walking through a forest. If one gets tired, the other slows down. If one stumbles, the other reaches out a hand. But no one carries the other the whole way, because if one person has to carry the other, eventually both collapse, and no one gets to enjoy the journey. Love is the same. When each person feels whole, confident, self-aware, clear on their dreams and boundaries, they show up with respect, not control, not over-sacrifice, not merging into one blurred identity. The Buddha once said in the Samyutta Nikaya, "Be a lamp unto yourself. Rely on yourself. Do not depend on others." If both people are lamps unto themselves, then when they walk side by side, the path ahead is filled with light. No one dims for the other to shine. No one steps on the light of the other. And within that shared brightness, love becomes a spiritual journey, a place where you keep learning, keep growing, keep letting go of what's not real. You learn to listen without judging. You learn to speak without harming. You learn to walk together without trying to possess. And you realize love isn't about becoming one. It's about staying true to who you are within connection. Maybe you've loved someone with everything you had and still felt drained. Not because you loved the wrong person, but because you forgot to save some of that love for yourself. The best relationships aren't the ones where you never fight. They're the ones where you can disagree without falling apart, where there's distance without coldness, where there's freedom and still deep belonging. Being alone doesn't make you love less. It teaches you to love better. Because when you don't need some just to feel loved, you won't put that weight on them. You won't demand they complete you. You won't love from emptiness, but from understanding. And from that understanding, you begin to see that real love doesn't come from finding the right person. It comes from becoming the right person for yourself. 8. Stillness is the soil where self-knowledge grows. There's one question. One quiet, powerful question that if you're brave enough to sit with it, might change your life forever. Who am I when no one is watching? Not who you are as a mother, a father, a partner, or a friend. Not who you are at work in your reputation or through someone else's eyes. But you, just you, bare silent with nothing to prove, That question doesn't get answered in a meeting. It won't come to you in traffic or while scrolling through your phone. It only whispers slowly when you enter silence. But let's be clear. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the absence of the need to become anything. You don't need to be interesting. You don't need to stand out. You don't need to be right. It's just you and your own presence. Have you ever felt that moment? Maybe early in the morning in a quiet room when there's no one to impress, no one to be polite, to no one to perform for. And suddenly, your mind begins asking strange questions, the kind that feel too honest to ignore. What am I really living for? Where am I actually going? Am I still living in alignment with my heart? That's when the acting stops. And when the acting stops, the being begins. In Buddhist practice, this is called mindfulness and self-inquiry. Mindfulness is being fully present. Self-inquiry is looking deeply within, honestly, without judgment. And stillness is the rich soil where both begin to grow. You can't understand yourself in a crowd. You can't see yourself clearly when you're always being pulled by noise, by duty, by expectation. It's like a pond. When it's stirred, it can't reflect the sky. But when it's still, it becomes clear. That's what silence does to the heart. Now, silence isn't always peaceful at first. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Because when there's no one left to please you, might realize you're not exactly the person you thought you were. You start to see that some of your choices didn't come from your deepest truth, but from habit. You notice how often you say yes when your heart quietly says no. You realize it's been a long time since you truly asked yourself, how do I want to live? And that's where self-knowing begins. Not the kind of knowing like I'm an introvert or I like the color blue, but the kind that says there are fears I haven't faced. There are old wounds still shaping my decisions. There are things I said yes to just because I was afraid of being left behind. The Buddha once said, one who does not know oneself, even if they live 100 years, walks through life like a dreamer. To know yourself is to wake up. It's to drop the mask the world asked you to wear and return to the truth your soul always knew. And the truth doesn't arrive because you force it. It comes because you've become quiet enough to hear it. Stillness doesn't teach you to become someone new. It simply makes space for you to remember who you were before the roles, before the noise, before the pretending. You don't need to be the most interesting person in the room. You don't need to be the most successful. You just need to be the person who knows how you're living, how you're feeling, and where you're headed. And that no one can teach you. You only learn it by sitting with yourself every day. Just a little bit. A few moments of stillness before the day begins. A few moments of stillness before sleep. A few moments of stillness between conversations. A few breaths doing nothing else. Over time, you'll begin to hear a voice within you. Not loud like society's expectations. Not rushed like deadlines, not harsh like comparison. A soft voice, the voice of your inner life. And the beautiful part is, it's always been there. You just haven't heard it because you've been too busy for too long. 9. Emotional freedom is the ability to sit with yourself. There's a kind of freedom that doesn't come from being able to do whatever you want. It doesn't come from saying everything you feel without anyone stopping you. It doesn't come from walking away from the person who hurt you. It comes from the ability to sit quietly with your own emotions. A wave of sadness rolls in, and you don't rush to find someone to soothe you. You don't pick up the phone. You don't post something online hoping someone will notice. You simply stay with it. That's the beginning of emotional freedom. When you can sit with yourself, whether you're sad, empty, anxious, and not need anyone else to witness it, you've already begun to step out of emotional dependency. I know that might sound hard. Since childhood, you were comforted when you cried. You were held when you were afraid. You learned that someone else could help you feel better. And now, as an adult, maybe you're still seeking those things. In a hug, a conversation, or even just a notification lighting up your screen. But what happens when no one's there? When you fall into a long night with no one to call? When pain arrives and no one shows up? That's not a moment of weakness. It's your chance to become strong in a whole new way. Strength isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about staying present with what you feel without panic, without running, without reaching for something to numb the ache. In Buddhism, this is called mindfulness of feeling. Vedananupassana. It's the gentle, grounded awareness. I'm sad, I'm anxious, I feel empty, and that's it. You don't judge it. You don't have to fix it, just know it. You see, emotions are like clouds, they pass. Not because you force them to, but because their nature is impermanence. But you'll never witness that truth if you keep reacting. When you're sad, you eat. When you're anxious, you talk too much. When you feel empty, you date, scroll shop, anything to escape the discomfort of being with yourself. And so, you become dependent on the outer world, just to manage your inner one. But what if you just sat down, did nothing, just breathed, and listened to your feelings like an old friend? You'd discover something profound. Your emotions aren't as scary as you thought. Sadness just wants to be heard. Fear just wants to be understood. Loneliness just wants to be allowed, not pushed away. You don't need someone else to fix how you feel. You just need to stop abandoning your emotions. Stop ignoring them, denying them, or rushing past them. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha taught the 4 foundations of mindfulness: the body, the feelings, the mind, and the teachings. And feelings, your emotions, are one of those foundations. You don't have to become a monk or meditate in a cave to practice this. All it takes is one moment of pause. When an emotion rises, you stop and face it. No retreat, no resistance. That is courage. Emotional freedom doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means your feelings no longer control you. You can be sad, but still peaceful inside. You can feel anger, but choose not to lash out. You can feel empty, but not demand someone else fill the void. Because you understand, your emotions are not who you are. They're just visitors passing through the house of your mind. And when you can sit still, you become the true host of that house. Yes, there may be days when all you want is someone to say, "It's going to be okay." But if no one comes, then be that voice for yourself. Not to escape, but to comfort. not to reject your emotions, but to stand beside them, like a loyal companion who never walks away. You deserve that kind of presence from yourself. 10. Returning to yourself without shutting down. You know, living alone. Returning to yourself doesn't mean withdrawing from the world. It's not about building a wall between you and others. It's not about shutting the door to your heart so you'll never be hurt again. I'm not suggesting that you become a hermit. I'm not saying the world is too noisy and you should escape it. Quite the opposite. I believe that only when you've returned deeply enough to yourself can you show up fully for others. Because by then, you're no longer losing yourself in every conversation. You're no longer bending yourself just to be loved. You're no longer shrinking or stretching to fit someone's idea of who you should be. You know who you are. You understand your boundaries, and you have a place to come home to. That place is you. In Buddhist teachings, there's something I often tell my students. Practice is not about leaving the world behind. It's about returning to yourself, so that when you step back into the world, you're free. Let that truth sink in. Coming back to yourself is not about retreating. It's about returning, but with a heart that no longer clings, no longer controls, and no longer gets swept away by illusions. When you've lived alone long enough, you begin to see clearly how you've lost yourself in relationships, how you used to crave recognition, how you compromised too much just to stay, how you swallowed silence just to avoid being left behind. And then one day, you sit quietly and ask yourself, who am I? If I no longer need to be chosen by anyone, that one question, if you dare to live it fully, becomes the key that opens up an entirely different life. A life where you don't have to shrink, but also don't need to perform. You don't fight the world anymore, but you're no longer dependent on it either. You still love, you still connect, you still show up in life as part of its flow, but you're not swept away by that flow. You stand steady, you carry your own calm, and because of that, you love others more clearly, more freely. You cherish connection, not because you need it to feel whole, but because you choose to honor it. The Buddha once said, "The awakened one lives in the world like a lotus in the mud, untouched by it, yet not avoiding it and still offering fragrance." That's the image I hope you'll carry in your heart. You don't have to shut down to protect yourself. You just need to know you have a home within, and no one can take that away from you. When you've learned how to be alone, you no longer fear being left. When you understand yourself, you stop expecting others to fill the emptiness. When you dwell peacefully within you, no longer chase validation. And that's when you return to the world, not to get something, but to give. You no longer ask, "Do they love me? Am I enough yet?" You simply show up whole, present, and gentle. You can sit in a crowd and not feel lost. You can stand beside someone without needing to hold on. You can walk away without leaving a part of yourself behind. Because now, you've brought your whole self with you, whole, rooted, at peace. In my years of spiritual practice, I've witnessed this in those who've made peace within. They don't speak much. They don't need to explain themselves. Their presence alone brings calm to others, and that kind of presence doesn't come from always living out there, always chasing. It comes from returning not to escape, but to heal. to heal the parts of yourself that you once abandoned just to feel loved, to heal the old wounds still whispering beneath your smile, to heal the quiet places inside that are still waiting for you to come home. And once you're healed enough, you no longer shut yourself off. You open your heart, not because you're hoping to receive something, but because you have nothing left to fear. You're not afraid of being misunderstood. You're not afraid of rejection. You're not afraid of being judged. Because now you know no one can take away the stillness that lives within you. 11. Freedom from always becoming someone. Have you ever grown tired of constantly having to be someone? A perfect child, the ideal partner, a top employee, a cheerful friend who's always okay, always available, always fine. Society starts us off with expectations, and we grow up swimming in them like fish in the sea. Unaware, we've been drifting in an ocean of roles designed for us before we even knew who we were. Can you remember the last time you did something simply because it felt true to you, not because you should? Not to achieve anything, not to be praised or accepted or admired, not to impress or fulfill someone else's hopes, but just because it felt honest, because it felt right for you. When was the last time you lived like that? Or has it been so long that you've forgotten what it's like not to constantly become someone, something? The Buddha once said, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." It sounds freeing, doesn't it? But also a little lonely. Because when you truly walk your own path, you must be willing to let go of the roles society has placed on your shoulders. Living alone at its deepest level is not about physically isolating yourself. It's about returning to yourself. It's about resting in that quiet space where you no longer have to become, to prove, or to perform. You can simply breathe as yourself, grieve as yourself, dream, fall silent, fall apart, and begin again as a human being without a script. I know that's not easy, because somewhere deep inside, many of us have been conditioned to measure our worth through the eyes of others. As children, we learn that we're loved when we're obedient. As adults, we learn we're accepted when we're successful. And slowly, we forget how to love ourselves when we're not achieving anything. But you know what? It's in those very moments when we're not striving, not pleasing, not performing, that we begin to touch the edges of real freedom. In Buddhism, there's a beautiful concept called anatta, or non-self. It doesn't mean erasing who you are. It means seeing that what we often call self is just a bundle of borrowed things. Opinions, fears, desires, labels, expectations, all the roles that life assigned us. When you live alone, or rather when you live with yourself, you finally have the space to notice which parts of you are truly you and which were borrowed and never returned. The greatest liberation isn't found in becoming anything. It's found in the quiet refusal to keep becoming someone you're not. You don't have to fit a mold. You can be wrong. You can be inconsistent. You can change. You cannot know what you want. And none of that makes you any less worthy. When you begin to live honestly, without pretending, without polishing yourself up for others, you radiate something different, something real. And that kind of authenticity heals deeper than any spotlight ever could, because that light comes from within. Imagine yourself as a quiet stream deep in the forest. That stream doesn't have to reach the ocean to have value. It doesn't need praise. It doesn't strive to be a river or a waterfall. It simply flows its own way. And in doing so, it nourishes the trees, the animals, the life around it. You are that stream. You don't need to become someone else to be worthy of love or peace. In the beginning, coming back to yourself might feel lonely because there's no one left to impress, no one to compare yourself to, no more battles to win. But there's also no more cage made of expectations. Instead, you begin to listen, not to the noise outside, but to the whisper inside, gentle as breath, soft as a temple bell in the morning. That voice has been waiting for you to drop the act, so it can finally tell you, you don't need to become anything. You just need to come home to yourself. And perhaps that homecoming is the most meaningful thing we can do in a lifetime. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. In a world full of noise and pressure, maybe the most profound gift you can give your soul is the permission to just be yourself. Not everyone has the courage to return to this gentle honesty, but if you're already on your way, even with one small step, you've already begun to heal. If this message touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Buddhism Seeds, where we nurture awareness and inner peace. Like and share this video to shine a little light for those still lost in the roles they play. And feel free to comment below. What are you currently living with? What part of this message made you pause? I read every word with sincerity, and I send you this quiet reminder. You are enough, just as you are in this very moment.